Welcome to Bridging Chicago, a podcast that aims to connect our listeners to Chicago's business, community, cultural, and charity leaders.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. We're so excited to be kicking off season 8. I can't believe we're 8 seasons now into the podcast and we have had some wonderful guests and leaders here in the Chicago region. We've been in Florida and we've been in Vegas, but we always love to keep it here in Chicago. And so we're really excited to be kicking off a new season with you. And I get to do it with these two ladies, which is also very exciting. So I want to introduce Kelly Fair. And Kelly is the founder and executive director of Pebbles. And we're going to learn more about that in just a minute. But also we have Cecilia Cuff along with us, who is the founder of the Nascent Group. And we came across you, unfortunately, a little too late to feature your event, but we still wanted to highlight your organizations and what you're doing because it's so great for Chicago and especially for Black and Brown people in Chicago. And so we'll get into all of that. But where we generally start with our podcast, because we are Bridging Chicago, we generally start with your Chicago story. So if you can give us a little bit about your Chicago story. Were you born and raised here? Did you move here? Like, what brought you to Chicago? And then we'll kind of learn more.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and thank you guys so much for the opportunity. When I think about my Chicago story, I think about, really describing myself as a native daughter of the far South Side. So I am from and grew up in a community named Princeton Park, which is on the far South Side, right off the 95th and the Dan Ryan Expressway. Okay. But then I also think about my family. We've been here, migrated to the Chicagoland area very early on from parts of Alabama and Mississippi. Oh, wow. So I also think about myself as a descendant of some very, I love to call them iconic Morgan Parkers. So if people are really familiar with the far South Side and think about Beverly and think about what the Morgan Park community was for African Americans who were brought here in that neighborhood to kind of typically serve as domestic supports for the Beverly community, that's a good portion of where my family is from both areas. And so I'm fourth generation to go to Morgan Park High School and returned after bachelor's degree, graduate work back to Chicago, and have been involved in educational kind of programs on the private sector side with textbook publishing on the faith-based nonprofit side, and then started Pebbles 15 years ago in 2009.
Okay, so we have about 3 episodes worth of material in there, so we'll get to all that. But thank you for sharing about yourself. And thanks. Cecilia, love to hear your Chicago story.
Absolutely. So I say my Chicago story is a little different. I'm born in Philly, so I'm an East Coaster, and both my parents went to Penn State, and I know that as most of our most of our parents, or those who came before us, they were in search of more opportunity and more, I think just more opportunity. And so I think my father worked so hard to make sure that I was going to a great school and would had a future in front of me that felt very diverse, so like the world was your oyster. And so he found that in Chicago. And so at a young age, I moved to Chicago. And I think, at that point, going to high school and then again I went to University of Illinois Chicago, then I think that's when I started to see the world, and Chicago then became, from a design aspect, kind of the co-conspirator to like my story and my life. So I was inspired by everything from being able to ride my bike down Milwaukee Avenue and see a myriad of different cultures, or having an incredible friend group in the, I would say, wild days of Milwaukee Avenue and Wicker Park that were extremely diverse, extremely art driven, hearing the sounds of music and through the streets. And so started to really think about my career path. I went to University of Illinois in Chicago and really thought that when I graduated, I would be a teacher. And that's led me through my entire career path of really mentoring and developing and having that ability to pay it forward and kind of shape career paths. But for some reason, I also love spreadsheets and building businesses and all of the nitty gritty of economic development. And so I would say that the aspect of community development and policy design and building businesses really kind of played in with that very rooted Chicago-based, Chicago-grown mentality that I felt like I had. But at the same time, I did leave Chicago for quite some time, designing Hyatt hotels and helping, work with Hyatt to build new hotels that were opening in their food and beverage operations, and learning what it meant to be a young leader, specifically through Hyatt. And so I feel really lucky to have those formative years starting right here in Chicago, where we have, our Hyatt corporate office, and then went on to realize that building businesses really meant building the communities that we were in. And so that's where my company, the Nascent Group, started in 2016. And so we've been able to help develop businesses and resorts and all different types of projects all over the country, and then moved back to Chicago to be able to bring that to the South and West Side. So now, day to day, we are a minority female driven and run company. And we have done projects all over the city and help on majority on the South and West Sides, and female and minority owned businesses to make root and grow. And so that's kind of our path. So again, I think Chicago, it definitely feels like a Chicago story, but I'm not a Chicagoan, so don't ask me what high school I went to.
Well, in some ways, that's the typical Chicago story, right? It's like what you learn in other places kind of ends up here in the Midwest, and people come here for the opportunity, but they also come here for the community. And it's interesting being from Philly, because it's like the city of brotherly love, right? And then you have Chicago with all of its neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods are very centric on family and just helping each other out and being a good neighbor. And I think at one point Albany Park was like one of the most diverse speaking neighborhoods in the country, as far as there were more languages spoken in Albany Park than almost any other neighborhood in the country. And so when you think about those two, about this concept of brotherly love and about Chicago's neighborhoods, what do they have in common, and sort of what are the differences that make Chicago unique in those things?
I think that the ability to grow a community of generations that are very comfortable being aware and celebrating diversity is something that, we allude to it all the time, that makes Chicago a very unique, and I think the mayor calls it the best freaking city in the country or the world. But I think we celebrate our diversity in a way that feels safe. And I don't necessarily think that that's something that many other cities have. Where brotherly love, in Philly means, taking care of your neighbor. Here, it's understanding that although your neighbor might look different, they are the same as you. And I think that that's something that, in a way that I've seen, is that, Pilsen takes care of the community next to it, or, even on the same street on Division. I remember when Division had so many different people living there. So I think it's the ability of, and it starts in the school systems. When you grow up and come through a space that feels diverse, there is no other difference, because we celebrate diversity, we celebrate heritage, we go to our friends' houses for lunch, and their parents cook a different type of cuisine. And I think as far as the cultural landscape, the tourism landscape, and as well as the hospitality landscape, that's why we have such a great food city. So it speaks to the experience that is a Chicago experience, which everyone knows rests on the diversity of our city.
Yeah, it's a great point. Kelly, I want to get back to the South Side. You were talking about the South Side. I kind of got to go to the South Side more regularly for the first time last year. I was playing in a volleyball league in Beverly.
Okay.
And I'd never really been, I've been south, but not that far south. And so it was a good experience for me. But what I kind of learned for me was that it really wasn't different than many other places. Like, it was a community that had small businesses, that had people who had been living there forever, people who knew each other. I don't know what I thought would be different about it, but there really wasn't as much different about it as I thought there might be. and unfortunately, a lot of that is based on what you hear in the media and the news and what, Chicago is known for on its south and west sides. But as someone who is so ingrained in the neighborhood and identifies with it so closely, what is it about the South Side that makes it special? And what are some things that people may think about it? And even outside of people think that it's violent, I know, like, for me, it was like, oh, this neighborhood is providing for itself. Right. It's really self-sustaining. And it's really actually helping to provide for the city as well, is kind of was my takeaway. But what do you think about people's perceptions and what might be different than what they understand it to be?
No, I think that's a really great question. I think one of the things that most, the myth about Chicagoans, the myth about Southsiders is that when you're from the South Side of Chicago, it's not a monolith. And so we all have to really be committed, as Cecilia was talking about, to say, yes, Chicago is really diverse, but how do we make sure that we're putting on the lens to do our due diligence to take those chances? Yeah. So I have friends who joke, and they're just like, look, coming south of 63rd or 55th, like, we need to pack a lunch, you know what I mean? Because it's like taking a road trip. But those trips are necessary. But if we're talking about bridging Chicago, we've got to be comfortable knowing that you got to bridge and take a trip and see what it's like to come far south, the same way that the expectation is for me to bridge and go up north and see what the diversity looks like. The issue that we talk about a lot in Polished Pebbles, working with, for 15 years, mostly Black girls and now larger community of Black and brown girls, is that we have to close certain gaps. We talked about achievement gap. In March, we talk about gender pay gaps, gender leadership gaps. We have to first close the hope gap. Yeah. So whereas you came down and said, wow, Beverly is just like other communities, it's self-sustaining. That is true of some Southside communities, but then the reality is there's a lot that don't. And so for us to create those bridges for young people and girls to go to other communities, like Cecilia said, hospitality, the restaurants, Chicago being a food city, may be that first step that girls can take to kind of bridge and see what other communities are like. So there's tons of Southsiders that look like me that, are educated, been to other parts of the city. So I feel like my duty to make sure that our girls can move beyond the 4 to 6 block radius of their homes and create opportunities and forge partnerships like we have with the Nascent Group, with Bronzeville Winery, where it's a bridge just for our far South Side girls to come to a place like Bronzeville Winery in the Bronzeville community and meet a Cecilia Cuff. Then we can keep bridging to other parts that, now I can go to the Southside Sanctuary and enjoy what that experience is like on 47th Street. And then she can bridge us to other parts of the community. So the South Side is ready. The South Side has a self-sustaining part. We have the parts that are challenged. But if we're not all doing our due diligence in different parts of the city, finding ways, finding partnerships and folks to bridge those gaps, then, some of those gaps and those lacks of experiences and connectivity will continue to kind of persist.
I think one of the things that people have talked about over time of, maybe why don't I visit these places, is they say, well, I don't want to be the person that's coming in and saying, oh, let me eat at your restaurant to help you out. Let me leave a Google review so you get more, exposure or whatever. And I think there are various reasons people probably do and don't visit different places. But when we're talking about the South and West Side specifically, there are some people who say, that's their community. I don't want them to feel like I'm coming in and trying to not just gentrify, but even just be in their space, And I'm wondering, Cecilia, if you might have some thoughts on this as far as someone who's come into a space that, wasn't your home originally and kind of come into this space for someone who is wanting to travel to one of these neighborhoods and not even there, just other neighborhoods as well. Do you have any thoughts on how you can be a good neighbor when you're not necessarily part of that community, but you're visiting and you're wanting to just come in and see and experience what the community has?
Absolutely. I will first say that as a business owner on the South Side of two spaces, one being Brownsville Winery on 44th and Cottage Grove, and the second being Southside Sanctuary, a green event space on 47th and King Drive. And knowing that my community is all business owners and small businesses, money is the best way you can help any business. So having a hesitancy or some sort of internalized thought process of maybe we as Southsiders don't want other people coming in, that's absolutely not the truth. I will say our biggest focus at Brownsville Winery is figuring out how to make sure that we create a space where everyone feels welcome. Because when people go to Michigan Avenue, I don't think people think about, does Michigan Avenue want me there? Yeah. Just because Michigan Avenue doesn't necessarily have its own identity as far as it's downtown, Right. The bean will be fine if you come. It's not, But I think Brownsville Winery, and I can speak to other Southside businesses, which I know well, like Peaches or, the bike shop on 44th and or 45th and Cottage, small shop. All of the businesses thrive from people jumping on Lakeshore Drive, feeling like it's approachable, having a parking spot, which we have on Southside still, and them visiting, because I think it's the representation. The more diversity that we have within our businesses on the South Side, the better from an interaction standpoint. From a cultural relations standpoint, it's very important for people to feel comfortable being in a space. And then also it's the storytelling aspect, right? When someone leaves and they say, I always tell people, we had the Democratic National Convention that we hosted. Yeah. Every state came to Brownsville Winery for a preview lunch. Wow. And I went back and I said, when you go back to your state, I need you to be that advocate for the South Side. Yeah. No one else is telling the stories of, I had the best lunch that I've ever had in Chicago on the South Side, or I saw a beautiful storefront with a garden on the South Side, or the dress shop next door, or the art store that's right next door. So it's more important to be that advocate and that storytelling, and that's the best that they could ever do for any South or West Side business. We need advocacy, and so we never think about it in terms of, are they gentrifying? We think about it in terms of, are they keeping our business alive? And that's really important. Yeah.
Can I just mention too, when they come, it's the advocacy and then it's the economic boost. Mm-hmm. I'm interested in that, of course, is working with tweens and teen girls so that now these partnerships can continue to flourish. And that way Cecilia can take interns that can turn into other full-time, part-time positions for our students as well. So as her business continues to thrive, it impacts the entire ecosystem economically, and it creates a really strong workforce development pipeline for us too.
Can you share a little bit about that trickle-down effect then? Because I think that one of the things that you mentioned, Cecilia, was about education, about the schools and the role that the schools play in all this. And I'm interested to hear, Kelly, about your thoughts on when you are, pumping into the economy of a neighborhood, what that means in that trickle-down effect, and even for the schools, what it means for education.
I mean, what I think about is, one baseline, like I just mentioned, now Cecilia can possibly take interns, part-time students, on the staff. But it also, for our students, says that if you want to be successful in your future career, yes, we will take you on shadows and come downtown, and you can come to the Gold Coast or the financial district of downtown Chicago. But it also means that you can be successful right here in your own neighborhood. Yeah. So now you get to see what a CEO looks like on the South Side of Chicago. Cecilia now can create opportunities, and girls get a chance to shadow her and see what that looks like. So it does not automatically mean that to be successful, independently wealthy, to be a community leader, I have to go somewhere else. I can be that right here in my own neighborhood. And then when she's creating opportunities that now people are filtering in, now their gap is closed, not only just on the Chicago scene, but now we're creating better U.S. citizens that now get to see what the DNC looks like, and all these people from the different parts of the country come through. So it is feeding into a career pipeline for us that starts from the schoolyards and prepares them for the future boardrooms. But we need our business communities and our neighborhoods to be strong.
I think that's a great point that you mentioned, even just creating future voters. future girls, especially in your situation, but even young men who are, going to be voting someday, who feel like it's a civic responsibility that they can see direct effects of, and that, they see, oh, we need more CEOs on the South Side. And one way to do that is to make sure that we have representation at all levels. Mm-hmm. And Cecilia, I'm interested to hear from you. To be quite honest, it seems like quite a burden to shoulder to be that person who people look at and say, like, that's who I want to be someday, and I want to do that here. So how do you kind of see that responsibility, and how do you respond when people like Kelly come and say, hey, I have girls who need to see what you do and who need to see how you do it and need to see where you do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I will also bounce back to the education aspect of it, because I do think that education comes in many different forms. Many times we expect to drop off children at school and then they have the lessons and then they grow up to be civic minded and leadership oriented and understand savings and business. But to be honest, that's not what the school system is set up for. And so there are leaders like Kelly who create these systems and these pathways. And so I will say, I am always excited to have the opportunity to work with the next generation, because I feel like the education aspect is us taking it into our own hands. Yeah. So, when we built Southside Sanctuary, we had this incredible group of young people that I put on my team, and I taught them every aspect of how to design a space, from the zoning and permitting to the architectural design to working with our aldermanic powers that be to make sure that systems are put in place, to community engagement to make sure that when you design a space in a community that it is the voice of the community, that and then also from a programming standpoint. And so the idea is that now this next generation of young leaders has hands-on experience, which I think is just as important. And also I think that from an internship aspect or an internship standpoint, it's something that more affluent communities, you see hey, my son needs a job in a golf course so that he can one day own his own golf course. But I want to say, I want to see 50 young women from Polished Pebbles, and I want to take them to our architect's office, which is Future Firm from Anne Louis, and show them what a minority female architect looks like. That's super incredible. I want to take them to meet our deputy mayor, Kenya Merritt, who understands city planning and can be that hands-on representation. Or I want to take them to Alderman Dowell's office to understand somebody who has been so ingrained in a community and knows the heartbeat of what community development should look like in a very successful way. And I want them to know that this is a job or this is a trajectory that they could be in. But more importantly, I think that those things come to me now because I had, the Penny Pritzkers who ran Hyatt, who I knew existed, or Susan Santiago, who I looked up to in the Hyatt and Women in Hyatt programming at my early age. And so having those role models at a young age for me makes it so that I feel like my job is purpose driven. So every job that I create on the South Side, every business and small business I open on the South Side, and every young woman that I work with to mentor, it's a no-brainer because it's just it's all of us reinvesting in those people who have invested in us. And it's representation and it's storytelling. So we're really setting up our communities for success for the future, but by being hands-on.
I want to say this too. It's also on trend with global standards for workforce development. Apprenticeships are a model that you go to other countries, that's an automatic thing. So we just have to, and at this point, we have to raise young people to be global citizens. It's not just enough to just know your local, landscape. You got to know U.S. and to be quite frank, the way things are changing in our current society and world, you got to be a strong global citizen. So she's naturally doing what comes to her. We've been trained to do it, and it's wonderful when it lines up with what are the global trends and how things are happening in workforce development all over.
Which can feel like a bit of luck sometimes, but they always say luck is preparation meeting opportunity, and I think that tends to be true in business a lot, where it's like, sometimes when it's natural, it does need to line up with what the world needs at the time too, and I think we're definitely in that phase right now of these global opportunities that I think are just going to explode here soon. We have so much more to talk about. We haven't even talked about Polished Pebbles yet, so we have so much more to talk about. But we do want to take a break, and we're going to put this in a 2-part episode so that we don't miss any of it. So we're going to end this episode, and make sure you come back next week where we'll post part 2 of this episode where we're talking to Kelly and Cecilia, and we'll have more about their organizations and what they're doing in the city and how you can partner with them. So be sure to come back next week and catch part 2.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including, but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.